Hey guys, this is Clinton. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I will teach you how to add JWT Authentication to your Nest.js API. By the end of this video, you will learn how to scaffold the Nest.js application, connect to an SQL database, create entities, then we'll move further to implement JWT Authentication to allow your users to sign up, log in, and then protect your API routes. So if you find this video interesting, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Without much delay, let's get started. So this video assumes that you have Node.js and npm installed locally on your computer. With that said, let's go ahead and install the Nest.js CLI. I'll do that right here on my terminal. I have the Nest.js CLI already installed. If you haven't done that, give it some time to complete and scaffold the Nest.js application. This is Nest new. Let's call this JWT Auth. So the command will prompt us to choose the package manager for this application. So for the video, we're going to use npm. Then Nest.js will scaffold the necessary folder structures for this application and install the packages. So our Nest.js application has successfully been created. Let's change directory into the project folder. Then let's open this up on your favorite text editor and get our hands dirty. For this video, I'll be using VS Code. So I'm going to increase the font a little bit so it's more visible. Let's go ahead and get our database entities. So here in the SRC folder, I'm going to create an entity directory. In the entity directory, I'm going to create a user.entity.ts file. To create the user entity, we need to import few decorators. So we need to import the entity decorator. We need the column decorator to define the properties of our entity, and we need the primary generated column decorator to define primary keys of each record in our entity. So by default, Nest.js has prettier already configured for your project. So ensure that your code matches the rules that are defined here in the prettier file. But to make things easier for you, head over to extensions, search for the prettier extension, and get it installed. So I have already installed the prettier extension. All I need to do now is head back to the file, right click, choose format document with, and then select the prettier code formatter. So the code looks good now. Let's go ahead and define our entity class. This entity exports. So here in the entity class, we're going to define the properties of our user entity. So we are going to start from the ID field, which will be using the primary generated column. So our ID is going to be of type string. Then we're going to have another column for the username. So going to be of type string. Also, we're going to have another column for the password, which is going to be of type string. Then lastly, you're going to have a column for is online to know if the user is currently online or not. So this is going to be a Boolean field. Then here we're going to add a default property and then set the is online property to false. So let's go ahead and also format this using prettier. So now that we have created our user entity, let's go ahead and connect our application to an SQL database. We will do that in the app.module.ts file. But before then, we need to install the Nest.js type ORM module dependency. So we'll do that using the pm install at nestjs/type ORM. And in the app.module.ts file, we'll import the type ORM module. Type ORM module. So in the area of imports, we'll call the type ORM for root method and pass in our database credentials. So first of all, we are going to pass in the type of database we are using. So which is SQLite. So small x. Then we're going to find our database name. Let's call this auth.database. Then we are going to specify our entity. So hold on, let's import the user entity class. So we only have one entity, which is the user entity. Then we're going to set synchronize to true, so that in case we change any property in our user entity, the database will refresh and then update the table. So let's go ahead and format this. So now we have our database connected to our Nest.js application. Let's go ahead implementing JWT Authentication. To do that, let's head over to the Nest.js documentation to get some of the modules that are required to implement JWT Authentication. So here on the security tab, I'm going to click on authentication. So as you can see here on the authentication requirements, we have the passports, Nest.js passport module and then the passport local module. So let's go ahead and install this in our VS Code terminal. So while that is installing, let's get the other command. So now let's go ahead and then generate an auth module using the Nest.js generate command. So we're going to call this auth. So an auth module has already been generated. So here in the auth module, we are going to add some configuration to the module decorator. So we're going to add imports. So in the array of imports, we are going to import the type ORM module to register our model. So import the type ORM module. Then we need to also import the user entity. So here inside the array of imports, we use the type ORM for feature method to register our user entity to our app module. So it should be an array. Okay, so let's go ahead and format. Next, let's import the passport module we just installed and have it registered in our array of imports. Then let's go back to the terminal and install the Nest.js JWT module. That's Nest. So once this is installed, let's go back to our code and import the JWT module. So here we are also going to add the JWT module to our array of imports. This is where we configure the behavior of our JWT authentication. So we're going to bring in JWT module and then use the register method. In here we're going to configure object for our JWT module. So we're going to do that using the register method. Then here we're going to pass in the secret value for the secret. So for the secret, we're going to use OpenSSL to generate random hexadecimal string. So then copy this to a .av file, which we're going to create in the root directory of the project. So we're going to call this secret. Okay, back to the auth module. So here we're going to use process.env.secret. So then we're going to pass in the sign up option. So here we're going to have an object. We're going to pass in the expiration time. So we want our tokens to expire in 60 seconds. So let's get this formatted. So with the JWT configuration setup, let's go ahead and create an auth service. So we're also going to do that using the generate command. So we have our auth service created here. We're going to import the user entity. We also need to import inject repository and import repository. So here in our auth service class, we're going to add a constructor method. So inside the constructor, we're going to pass in a parameter inject repository, and then which takes in our user entity. Then let's create a private variable for user repository. So this is going to be of type repository and user entity. So here in our auth service class, let's go ahead and create a sign up method via an async function. So it's going to take user, it's going to be that user entity. So here now we are going to allow the user to sign up. So before we do that, we need to install bcrypt to hash the user's password, so we can't store the plain password in our database. So let's go ahead and install bcrypt module. And also the type for bcrypt. So with that installed, let's import the module. So here we're going to modify the user object. So instead of storing the plain password, we'll be storing the hashed password, which we're going to use bcrypt to create a hash for. So I'm going to say hashed password. It's going to be with bcrypt dot. So it's going to be hash. Then we're going to pass in the user dot password. Then we're going to specify our sort value. So we're going to use 12. Okay, this is const. So here let's modify the user object. So we're going to say user dot password is equal to hashed password. So now let's store the user record in the database. So we're going to use the user repository dot insert method. Then we're going to insert the user object. So let's return the result of this. Okay, now let's create another method to find a user. So create a find one method. I'm going to find the user by the username. It's going to be of type string and the password. It's going to be a string also. Then here, first of all, going to get the user. So we're going to do this using the user repository dot find one method. Then here we're going to use the where clause, and we're getting username. So this will run a query in our database to find a user that matches the username passed to this method. So let's check if the user exists. If not user, let's return null. So if the user exists, now let's check if the user password matches the hashed password. So we're going to say if wait pcrypt.compare. So we're going to compare the password with the user.password. So if this condition is true, okay, sorry, let's check if when it's not true. So it's easier, things will look better. So let's return now here. Okay, so if the condition is met, like if the user is found and the password matches, let's go ahead and return the details of the user. So return username, user.username. Okay, yeah, we need to await this here. So then is online. Is online. This is user. So let's get this formatted. So now we have our service created. Now let's go ahead and create our JWT local strategy. To do that, create a new file here, local.strategy.ts file. So in our local strategy, we're going to import strategy from Passport. Then you're going to import injectable to inject the class. So we need to import passport strategy, and we need to import the auth service. So here we're going to create an injectable class. class local strategy, so which is going to extend the passport strategy, and it's going to take in the strategy class. So here in our local strategy class, we're going to create constructor and then create a private variable for an instance of our auth service class. So this auth service, in here we're going to call the super method to inherit the properties of the parent class, which is the passport strategy. Then you're going to create a validate method which passports looks for to know if the username and password supplied by the user is valid or not. So we're going to create the validate method. So we're going to set the username of the user and of course the password. So this is password. So we're going to get the user from our user auth service. So we're going to say user, okay. With the auth service. So we're going to call the find one method. Then we're going to pass in the username of the user and the password. This is password. So let's get things formatted. So we're going to check if the user does not exist. True. Okay, we need to import. Oh, let's get rid of one of these. So yeah, we need to import an exception class unauthorized exception. So we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception. Then we're going to say incorrect username and password. So if a user is found, then we're going to return the user. So that's it for our local strategy. Now let's go ahead and create an auth controller to define the routes for our application. So we're going to use the Nest.js generate command also to do that. So here in the auth controller, we're going to create a sign up route. So before we do that, we need to import post decorator and then the body decorator. Then we need our auth service class. So here in our auth controller, we need to inject our auth service. So then let's create a post endpoint for the user sign up. So we're going to use the body decorator to pass in the request payload. So let's return with pass in the payload. So we have our sign up now created. Now let's go ahead and test this out. So to do that, let's start the application using the command npm run start. So let's go over to Postman. So here on Postman, we're going to send HTTP request to localhost port 3000/alt/signup. So it's going to be a post request. Then here in the request body, we're going to send the JSON formatted strings. So we're sending the username. Let's use my name here, Clinton, and then password. So let's test this out. Okay, we'll have an error from the server. Okay. We misspelled this password. This password and this password. Okay. So where else do we have this password? Wow, I think I misspelled password in so many places. So where else did we misspell password? Okay, let's check entity. Oh, shit. Okay. So everything should work now. Yeah, so our user has been created. You can see we have the ID of the user. So you can see the online property. So now let's go ahead and implement our login logic. So to do that, let's update the auth service to add a login method. First, we're going to import the JWT service class. Then here in our constructor, we're going to inject it. So let's add another method, which will take the user object as a parameter. Then this is going to return JWT service.sign. Then here we're going to pass in our payload. So we're going to pass in the username of the user to the token. Then for the sub value, we're going to add the user ID. So with the login method implemented, now let's update our auth controller to add a route for this. So to do that, let's update the auth service to add a login method. First, we're going to import the JWT service class. Then here in our constructor, we're going to inject it. So let's add another method, which will take the user object as a parameter. Then this is going to return JWT service.sign. Then here we're going to pass in our payloads. So we're going to pass in the username of the user to the token. Then for the sub value, we're going to add the user ID. So with the login method implemented, now let's update our auth controller to add a route. Here in the auth controller, okay, we have a warning. Let's change this to small b. Let's import the decorators we need. For the login routes, we need the use guards. Then we need to import the auth guard from Passport. Lastly, we need the request decorator. Then down here, use guards, passing the auth guard decorator to specify the strategy we're using for the login. So here we're using the Passport local strategy. Then this will be a post route to login. Then our login method. So here in the login method, we use the request decorator to get the record of the user that is currently logged in. Then we'll return the auth service.login method. Then we pass in the request the user object. So for the local strategy to work in the auth module, we need to import it here in the auth module file. So then we need to add it to the array of providers. Now with the login route implemented, let's go ahead and test it out on Postman. So here on Postman, since we have created an account for this user, let's go ahead and change the URL to login. Then let's test this out. Okay, we have an error. Okay, it seems the environment file is not loading properly. Okay, I'll just fix this and then continue the video. So according to the Nest.js documentation, the environment files are not being loaded by default. So to do that, we need to install this module and then have it configured to load the environment files. So I'll use Ctrl+C to create the server. Then paste this command. So while the command is installing, let's copy this to our auth module file. So here in the auth module, copy this above so the environment file gets loaded before we start using it here. And then of course we need to import the module. So config module. Okay, should be a semicolon. Alright, let's restart the server. And then back to Postman. So yeah, everything works. So a token has been generated for this user. Now let's go ahead and implement the JWT strategy to authenticate this token and then grant the user access to the resources in the API. To do this, let's create a new file in our auth module directory. Let's call this jwt.strategy.ts. Then we'll use Ctrl+C to quit the server and then install the JWT Passport module. So we also need the types for this module. So once the installation is completed, let's go ahead and import the module. We need the extract JWT. So we need the strategy. Okay, let's get this formatted. And we need to import passport strategy. Lastly, we import injectable. Now let's create a JWT strategy class. So which will extend the passport strategy and then text in the strategy class. So here we'll add a constructor method. So in the constructor method, we're going to call a super method and then add some properties here. So the first property we are going to add is JWT from request. So this will allow us to get the user's token from the request headers. So we use the extract JWT dot from auth headers as bearer token method. Then we need to add the ignore expiration. So set this to false. So to check if the token has expired. And lastly, we have the secret or key. So get this from our secret from the environment file. Then lastly, the JWT strategy class requires a validate method, which takes in the payload and returns the payload. So here we're going to return the user ID payload.sub and then username payload username. So what happens here is that when JWT verifies the signature and decodes the JSON data contained in the user's token, it invokes the validate method and passes in the decoded JSON as a single parameter. So then we can have access to the user object that is contained in the payload. So with this done, let's go ahead and update the auth controller to protect a route. Here in the auth controller, we're going to add a profile endpoint. So we're going to use the use guards and then as well as the auth guard. So here we're using the JWT strategy. We need one more decorator. So the get decorator is used to create a get endpoints, and this is going to be profile endpoints. So here in the profile method, we're going to use the request decorator to also get the details of the user that is currently logged in. Now we're going to return request.user. So for this to work, we also need to import the JWT strategy into our auth module. And add this to the array of providers. Oh, shit. Okay, so now let's start the server. Okay, everything works. Back to Postman. Now let's send a request to the profile endpoint. Okay, first of all, let's log in to get a new token. So copy the token to our request header. So it's going to be authorization. Then the format is going to be PRR. Then paste in our token. So let's change the URL to profile. Okay, it's going to be a get request. So as you can see here, since the token is valid, a user has been returned. Now let's modify this token, so we'll render it invalid. So as you can see here, we have a 4.1 status error, which is unauthorized. So we have successfully added authentication to our JWT API, and then we have used the JWT strategy to protect our API routes. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.